So on the heels of yesterday's episode, there was a comment in the comment section, but that's where comments would be, in the comment section, about position sizing and how would you do this and that and like kind of build into your position. So I just want to go back and review very quickly what we had done on the live stream a while back and take a look. Let's go over there again. So I had been adding, you know, so let's talk about the risk unit first. The live stream, you can go under the live tab at the YouTube channel and watch the full video there where I covered this extensively. So I'm not going to flog a dying horse here. But when you look at this here, one contract, here I'm adding another contract, I'm buying a third contract. There's several ways to do that and to understand, what this whole process means. You might come in and say, well, there's two ways that you could look at this. One might be that one is your risk unit. That's really what you add. So by the time you get to 4, if you had 1/2 of 1% risk units, you can say that by the time you got to buying your fourth piece, that you have 2% at risk in terms of portfolio heat. That's important because we're going to talk about that later this week. That has a lot to do with your returns, right? Returns and reward kind of go together. So, risk and reward go together. Reward and return are the same things. So look at this as how much portfolio heat can you take, or do you absolutely need, almost as a prescription for your success? You can't have a goal to make $1 million when you're taking off $200 winners. It's just, you're never going to get there. It's fantasy land. So in the coaching that we do, we do a lot of work on what's the goal, what's the dream, and then how do we marry your tactics up to get there? And that's where we start to make the adjustments, because the goal has to be congruent with what you know how to do, what you can execute tactically, right? So here you're buying one risk unit. Maybe this is good enough for you. You don't have to add to your winners, right? So you can just risk on, risk off with 1/2 of 1%, and that's fine. You might find yourself in a spot where you like to add to your winners at opportune times. This one could be based on, an ATR of 6. So you're adding it every 3 because that happens to be the optimal spot to do it if you're using an ATR-based system. So you could find yourself having 4 directional units, each one of equal weighting, right? So this isn't pyramiding where you're putting in smaller amounts of risk. This is just straight up adding to your winners based on your equity. Also, you can see that the stops are being adjusted in a very regimented manner, very strict manner. There's no discretion there. So that at the time that you're done, you could do this 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. It depends on the move, and it depends on what you're looking to do. What is the goal? A lot of traders come into the market and they're like, well, I got to put on the risk and I take the risk off. And, that's certainly one way to do it. But you'd be surprised how much money you can make if you just stop selling winners and let them run. The next way you could look at this would be like, well, 4 contracts would actually be my 1/2 of 1%. But I don't want to put that on all at once, right? Because then I'm going to find myself in a spot where I could be too big too quickly. And then if the market works against me, I could get blasted and it would have a very detrimental effect on my equity. So this is more my style in that I don't cannonball in. Cannonballing might be a strong word, but nonetheless, I'd rather be wrong with a smaller piece at the very, very beginning rather than trying to get in and get my timing exactly right. By trading it smaller at the beginning, I can have bad luck and bad timing, and it's not going to mean any damn thing. So if you come back here, you can see that 4 contracts might be your actual optimal risk unit. So, by the time it's up XYZ, you're just getting to a spot where, you'll have, your optimal position size on. So how does that make you feel? Because at the end of the day, this is risk management. This is what you're faced with. So in this case, you're actually starting only with, at the very beginning, at number 1, you're only actually putting on a piece as a taster unit. It's like an appetizer when you go out to dinner. Knowing that 4 contracts would be your optimal risk size. 1 is just you're building into your position over time. Now, some of you might, for this type of a style, say, well, Mike, this thing's already moved 9 cents. I've missed the move. To me, again, you don't understand the nature of how markets work, right? Things don't just go up 2 or 3 cents and then they stop. That's something that you make up in your mind and you speak to yourself about. But at the end of the day, you don't really have a lot of science. And I know there's armchair quarterbacks, but Mike, 9 times out of 10, it pulls back on you. That's really not true. That's not my experience at all. That's why I like to look at the data, because then I could learn how to position size into the instrument that I'm looking at in a way that's appropriate for the amount of money that I'm running and for the amount of risk that I'm willing to take on any particular name. You ought to do the same and stop looking at charts and put together some spreadsheets and kind of think about, like, what are you going to do behaviorally? Because that's going to predict how much money you make and lose, not the chart. What's most compelling is your behavior, not the chart's behavior. You need to know what you're going to do beforehand. And if you're looking at things as only moving 1 or 2 cents and then that's it, like, well, what are you even looking at it for? How are you going to make any money with that? You have to anticipate, especially with charts that are in the top right corner, things that have the possibility to move $10, $20, $30, maybe more. That should be your outlook, so that you can put on a piece of risk that's appropriate for where you are in your life, where you are with your investing and your trading, and let the winners run for as long as possible. That's the goal here. It's not to make nickels and dimes and feel good about it. We talked about that. Don't get in the habit of feeling good about taking small gains, because it takes 61 days. There was a study done. I'll have to figure out and find out where it was, but I remember distinctly that they said it takes 61 days to break a habit and replace it with a good habit. And taking small gains is a bad habit when you think about it. So you need to learn how to take on larger positions, but without taking on larger risk, because those two things are not the same, as long as you know where your protective stops are. And just to reiterate, before I close, you could see here, every time we added, I was only really risking 3 cents, even as the position grew. So by the time I got to the third risk unit, like if you looked at this entire structure here, and I get knocked out, everything's largely at a break even, right? I'm going to lose 3 cents on risk 3. I'm going to break even on 2. I'm going to make 3 cents on number 1. So this might be helpful for some of you who want to trade larger but don't want to just cannonball and pound in with that larger size at the beginning. And yes, there will be times when you get knocked out. There will be times when you can't get your second piece on. There will be times when you get your third piece on and you get knocked out. This isn't a game of accuracy, folks. This is a game of probabilities. And you can't fall to pieces because a certain trade that you fell in love with or you got your hopes up on didn't work out and didn't make you money. You're going to have to think about trading in terms of hundreds to thousands of instances. And all that is those are just data points for you to understand your own behavior, so that you could model your behavior in a better way to make money, right? So it won't always work out like this. I know that for sure. This would be ideal, but you have to begin with the end in mind, right? So this is what you would think to do. And again, you could either say, well, this one contract happens to be the perfect risk unit for me, and I'm going to add. So you could do a couple ways. You could say, this is my trading right here, risk on, risk off. You could say one contract is my risk unit, but I'm going to add. So I'm going to follow this entire thing. That's scenario number 2. Add and adjust my stops accordingly. So I'm not taking undue amounts of risk, because really when you think about it, you're not really risking all that money, although your position size is getting larger. And lastly, you could say, well, I want to just dip my toe in where 4 or whatever the N, call it N as a variable, is my optimal size. I'm going to nibble in one contract at a time till I get to my optimal size and adjust my risk accordingly, so that this way, if I lose 3 cents or 1/2 of an ATR on 1/4 of 1%, for example, right? If this represents a 1% risk unit, then this would be 1/4. If this 4 represents 1/2 of 1%, then this represents 1/8 of 1%. So you get to figure out what's good for you and what you can sleep with, what you can take home at night. Different strokes for different folks. I get that. But ultimately, you have to figure out, this is where the figuring happens, right? It's not by looking at the chart. It's really understanding what would you do at key inflection points as the price moves, and stop looking at the chart. That's the best way to kind of start understanding your behavior, because your behavior is what's going to predict profitability, not the damn chart pattern. Check out this video over here.